Before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the On Farm Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful.
Well, it's been one of those days. That's 5 trailer loads, nearly 160 sheep shifted from their tupping ground to their winter grass. What a day, mud, snow and fighting with sheep. It's Monty here again, Ross Montague, and welcome to this episode 2 of the mini-series that we're doing with the Moredun Foundation to celebrate their centenary year 2020. We heard last episode about how Moredun was established in 1920 by a group of forward-thinking farmers who were really alarmed at the rates of losses in their livestock. They came together and brought scientists into play to try and find cures and treatments to some of the terrible disease losses they were facing.
One of the first successes was they identified that Clostridial bacteria were the cause of many of these really nasty sounding diseases like Brachy and black disease and lamb dysentery.
And farmers back then were scared of these diseases, but Moredun gave them the tools to not be so scared.
Yeah, you would have dead animals or big parts of a flock going down and they were just dead. And obviously farmers and vets in those days were very interested, and they'd open them up, the carcasses, and have a look to see what was there. Very fortunately, the scientists a few years later went on to develop some of the very first vaccines against Clostridial disease. So it was a huge success.
If you haven't already listened to that episode, you'll find it in the catalogue of on-farm podcasts, probably just below this one. We switch now, for this episode, from looking at the past to looking to the future. And we're going to hear about how Moredun is still fighting livestock disease, still fighting for its farming owners, and now also playing a part in combating human pandemics, including the dreaded COVID-19.
When coronavirus first came out, we do have quite a bit of expertise at dealing with infectious disease outbreaks, so we are contributing through testing. We're also working with the NHS and other aspects of the coronavirus effort. For example, looking at immunity to the coronaviruses that circulate in animal species as well.
And gosh, this episode, we're going to hear from someone at the other side of the world. We'll hear from Jess, a sheep farmer in New South Wales, Australia, whose flock of merino sheep were struggling, significantly suffering from Barber's poleworm. We'll hear how Barbervax, a vaccine developed right here in Scotland at the Moredun, has turned around the fortunes of her sheep farm.
Prior to Barbervax coming out, there hasn't been a lot of new drenches come out in Australia. There's been 2 more recently, but we want to save them for when we need them as such, not overuse them. Yeah, it just made a massive difference to our health of our ewes and our pasture, and which obviously flows on to everything, wool production and the ewes rearing their lambs, all that sort of stuff.
I'm guessing that New South Wales is the furthest away geographically we're ever likely to get, and it just shows the global influence of Moredun. Before we get to the main bit of the show, a big thanks as always to anyone and everyone who's been shouting and sharing and shouting about the last episode on Twitter, Facebook, all over social media. It's great, we love it. We're here to tell stories, and we're always grateful for those of you who help us to do so. Probably not surprisingly, we've had some great Twitter feedback from Moredun team members, Philip Skuse and Beth Wells, thanks very much. Also Andrew Moyer, and also the National Sheep Association, who we'll speak to in another one of these Moredun episodes coming up. And remember, you'll find us on Twitter at @on_farm UK. Now, I hope we're all paying attention. We've got some real hardcore science coming up. We've got some real hard hitters in the science world from Moredun coming up. I learned a lot speaking to them, and I hope you will too.
My name's Tom McNeilly. I'm a vet by training, was in mixed practice for a few years, and then moved into the dark side of research. So I'm head of one of the departments at Moredun that focuses on disease control. So that's basically, ways of controlling infectious disease in livestock.
My name is Rocchi. I'm a vet. I do run the viral surveillance unit. We do perform tests on behalf of the Scottish Government in collaboration with SRUC, the Scottish Rural College, to look for infectious diseases, especially in ruminant.
And then we've got Al Nisbet. Al, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Al Nisbet. Yeah, I'm head of the Vaccines and Diagnostics department here at Moredun. I've been here just about 17 years now and have had a career in trying to develop new ways of controlling pests and parasites and diseases.
Al, I'm going to come to you first then, because vaccines, very topical at the moment. Just give us a little bit of a background to what a vaccine is and why we need a vaccine for livestock. What are we talking about here?
Sure, yeah, it's very topical indeed, of course, vaccines at the moment. There are a number of diseases of livestock that we can control with current drugs. There are some diseases that we can't control with current drugs. And for both of those categories of diseases, vaccines are really important. Diseases that we can't currently control with drugs, obviously we need some way of controlling them. Partly we can do that through management, but if we had vaccines for them, that would make life an awful lot easier. And some of the diseases that we can control with drugs currently, the organisms that cause the diseases are starting to become resistant to the drugs. And so vaccines is a good, safe, cheap alternative way to try to control those diseases.
I guess, I'm speaking from a sheep farming point of view, I'm getting my head around this. We are better to control diseases with a vaccine rather than look to treat with drugs. Is that's the principle of what you're talking about here?
In many cases, yes. It doesn't apply to all diseases. There are a lot of viral diseases that we can't currently control by using drugs. So we would have to rely on vaccines. But certainly, if you think of the kinds of things that are used to control bacterial diseases, antimicrobials, antibiotics. If we can replace those with vaccines, then obviously that extends the life of things like antibiotics. Again, some of the chemicals that we use to control parasites, if we have an alternative to using those chemicals, then we can prolong the life of both the chemicals and use vaccines at the same time.
Tom, you've just rushed in from the post-mortem lab, is that right?
I'm just come down from the post-mortem suite on site where we've been looking at the effectiveness of a vaccine against a cattle worm parasite that causes big losses in production in cattle systems. So very similar to the roundworms that affect sheep production, you'll probably be aware of. Currently they're treated with drugs, but as Al was mentioning, we're getting increasing problems with drug resistance, and so there's a real push to try and get other means of control. So we have a programme that's funded through Scottish Government to develop vaccines against this parasitic worm. Well, you'll be aware that cattle and ruminants in general are getting a bit of a hard time about the emissions of greenhouse gases. So there's a drive really to improve all of our society on this globe, through reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And one good way of doing that is by making production more efficient. So we really need to sort of be studying, vaccines and new therapeutics for these more chronic diseases, less spectacular than, some diseases that come into your flock or herd and cause big losses. But these are the kind of the silent, sort of insidious kind of diseases that are making farming inefficient. And a way that we're contributing to the industry and the effort is to develop ways that we can make farming more environmentally friendly and sustainable.
I hope the listeners are grateful to hear that kind of thing, because we're up against that, aren't we? Our backs are against the wall sometimes with climate change campaigners and suggesting that what we are doing is damaging the environment. So that is definitely something that we should keep in our armoury there, that, the healthier we can have our livestock, the more efficient we'll be. Just again, on that, Al, there's been a big breakthrough in recent years with a vaccine against a parasitic worm. Is that right? Rather than just worming the sheep, you've developed a vaccine. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's been a group at Moredun who have developed a vaccine against the barber's pole worm, which is a very common worm and a very damaging worm in sort of subtropical and tropical regions. Not quite so much in the UK, although we are seeing occasional cases of barber's pole worm in the UK and possibly more frequently. But this is a really big issue in Australia, South Africa. There's a group at Moredun who, over the period of about 20 to 25 years, developed a new vaccine against barber's pole worm. And in fact, it's the only vaccine that's been produced against the parasite of sheep. It's been a real breakthrough. That was developed here at Moredun and first marketed through a company that's actually a spin-out company from Moredun in Australia in 2014. And since then, it's been used fairly widely in the northern tablelands of New South Wales, particularly in areas where anthelmintics, wormers, no longer work against the barber's pole worm in sheep in that area. So in these areas, it's been a real game changer.
It sounds a massive game changer, especially when you say that there's massive resistance problems to the drugs that are used against these worms. We're now going to hear from a New South Wales farmer who has benefited from the use of BarberVax.
Good morning, Jess here. Just out shifting a little mob of ewes and lambs. Have my black and tan Kelpie, Grace. She's a 6-year-old female, along with her sister, which is red and tan female possum. Obviously, the flow-on effect from barber's pole, the sheep get crook and not rearing their lambs or growing wool or fattening in the operation. So yeah, it was a very big relief when BarberVax was brought into Australia. My name is Jess Allport. We are based up in the northern New England, east of Guyra, generally in a higher rainfall area. Our size of our property is about 7,500 acres, and we shore 2,300 sheep back in August. So I'm just up here at the gateway and I'm just going to put them through the gate. So prior to BarberVax coming out, there hasn't been a lot of new drenches come out in Australia. There's been 2 more recently, but we want to save them for when we need them as such, not overuse them. In a good summer, in a normal season, we could drench sheep sort of 3 times in 6 to 8 weeks with barber's pole, and yeah, it just made a massive difference to our health of our ewes and our pasture, and which obviously flows on to everything, wool production and the ewes rearing their lambs, all that sort of stuff.
Al, what do you make of that? Good feedback on your work.
It's great feedback, and it's certainly not my work. It's the work of one of the teams at Moredun, but fantastic feedback, and actually very typical of the feedback that we get in that area. It's, I guess, it's a truism of a lot of industry that you don't actually change things until you really need to. In that area, they really needed to change to get something else, and they've seen huge benefits from it. We certainly have had great feedback from users in New South Wales.
What is it about New South Wales? Why was there such a problem?
It's partly to do with the geography. The area in New South Wales where the barber's pole worm occurs is the northern tablelands, and that's a summer rainfall area. And this worm really likes warm and wet conditions. It needs warm and wet conditions to survive, and it really thrives there.
I'm going to just, if you like, knuckle down on this, because I need a wee bit of an understanding about how a vaccine prevents infection by a parasite. I understand, at least I think I do, understand how I can treat a parasitic infection, and how I can hopefully knock it out. But if I had one of these vaccines and I vaccinated sheep with it, what's the action that prevents the worm taking a hold, as it were?
Yeah, so it really comes down to what the parasite eats. The Barber's poleworm's principal diet, in fact, its only diet, is blood. It bites the inside of the stomach wall of the sheep and it drinks blood. That blood's full of antibodies. The antibodies go into the parasite and they attach onto the gut of the parasite. In some cases, that'll kill the parasite. In many cases, it actually just prevents the parasite from being able to produce eggs, which are a big issue because they come out and contaminate the pasture. That's really, a very basic way in which the vaccine works. It works very much in the same way as any other vaccine, in that you inject something into an animal, it produces antibodies against the pathogen. It's particularly effective against Barber's poleworm because it drinks a lot of blood, so it takes in a lot of antibody against itself.
It's kind of mind-blowing, that, because I as I say, you think of something that a vaccine being against a virus, not against something, a worm, as it were. That's just... Tom, you're listening to that too. Animal welfare issues aside here, why should a Scottish institution like Moredun be so keen to help what some farmers here might see as our competitors at the other side of the world?
I guess there's two things. One is that Homunculus contortus is not a parasite that is very prevalent in Scotland or in the UK, but as we're getting warmer and wetter climates, we are seeing more homunculus in the UK, so we're definitely having...
So homunculus, that's Barber's pole, yeah.
That's the Barber's poleworm, yeah.
Okay.
So we're having more problems with Barber's poleworm in the UK, and we're predicting that would increase. The second point is that by understanding how to develop a vaccine against one worm really helps you develop vaccines against other worms. So, for example, I've just come down from the post-mortem suites. We're using a similar approach to control this cattle worm that we used for the Barber's poleworm.
What's the cattle worm? What are you working on there?
It's Ostratagia, Ostratagi. So it's the most pathogenic or disease-controlling worm affecting cattle globally. Certainly, one of the main benefits I see from developing the Barber's poleworm vaccine to commercialization is that we now have a full understanding of the pipeline to get a vaccine developed at Moredun out into the field. And that's the pipeline that we'll take for other vaccines going forwards. I should point out that this vaccine was developed by Moredun and has been commercialised by Moredun with our Australian partners. So there was no big pharmaceutical company involved in this, which I think is another really sort of striking result for the investigators involved.
That sounds like a win-win. Not only are you sort of breaking the ground there and potentially bringing along vaccines that might benefit us, but you're commercialising and bringing funding for the other work that you need to do at the Institute.
I think that's a really important point, actually, Monty, because our model for any profit that's made from any of our products is that money all comes back into the Institute to fund research. So a lot of the money that's come back in from the sale of this vaccine and from other products that we've produced and licensed over the years actually comes in to fund our younger scientists, our new fellows, as well as existing research projects here. So it's a fantastic model, actually.
I'm going to be gallant here, Mara, and I'm going to suggest that you're the youngest of these scientists. Are you feeling the benefit in your work of income from the commercialisation of vaccines, etc.?
Yes, that is correct, but not only from vaccines. With funding provided by Moredun and by the Scottish Government, we started to look into tick-borne diseases. Again, those are linked, and they will be more and more linked to global warming. As you know, the ticks are moving up north. When they're moving up north, they're bringing new diseases, and they're also bringing out diseases that we thought were almost gone. So recently, in collaboration with Public Health England, we managed to demonstrate that now there is tick-borne encephalitis. That is a human disease, but is transmitted by the same tick that will transmit other disease like louping ill in sheep or tick-borne fever. So all this research work will open other avenue and will open a possibility to understand what the real situation is.
So we are actually, through the tick, as it were, we're linking louping ill to basically human disease and tick-borne diseases that affect humans. We hear about One Health. Is that work part of the sort of One Health strategy? Is that right?
Yeah, I think the majority of the veterinary diseases, you can see a One Health component. Most of the disease that you can find in your animal, especially food-producing animal, can be reflected in disease that can be transmitted to human and vice versa. So we need to be alert and we need to be looking for those diseases, not only from the human side, but from the veterinary side. And if you can combine the information on both, that will give you a better understanding of what is going on the field.
Ticks moving north and carrying diseases that, as you say, we thought we'd forgotten about. Is that something that keeps you awake at night? Is that a nightmare scenario?
Not really, not just now, because we have been so busy with COVID that one has actually taken over. But yeah, it's something that is always at the back of our mind, because you never know when the next zoonosis, the next animal to human transmitted disease will come from. And the tick have a very high potential to do that. We
talked about it in previous episode, but COVID, the rise of COVID, as it were, that was zoonosis, wasn't it? That definitely did come from animals and spread into the human population. Yes, that is the current understanding, although there has been alternative hypotheses presented, especially recently. So you're actually involved in that at the moment then, the testing and against coronavirus? Yes, we started discussing this with the NHS in March, and by the 25th of June, we started testing. We have a number of scientists on site that have offered their time as volunteer for the testing. From June until now, we have tested in excess of 10,000 samples. Most of those are care home staff, care home resident, but also some sample from the hospitals. It's high stakes getting this right then. How does it feel to be part of that battle and the importance of getting it right in the battle against COVID? Well, it's not only me. I think all the people that have been volunteering here at work, we have been very proud of what we have achieved in a short time. It gives you a very good feeling because you work with a large number of people. You might not have been worked with those people before, but also, and it builds up a team spirit very quickly, which is good for the work that we're doing just now for the coronavirus, but it's also very good for the work that we will be doing in future, because now we know we have at least 21, if not more, people that can work very well together, no matter what you throw them at. Team building in the fight against disease. I'm loving this chat in the sense that I'm getting a real feeling for, all of these things are driving us forward in the battle against various diseases, and you guys are the frontline workers.
I'd just also like to add on, another sort of interesting area Mara's mentioned that we're working on in the coronavirus effort. The veterinary community in general has been pretty used to dealing with large outbreaks of infectious disease. If we think back to the foot and mouth disease outbreak, there's a lot of expertise in infectious disease. One would argue that the veterinary sort of world is more used to having new infectious diseases, so swine influenza, for example, and controlling them through testing, deploying vaccines if you have them, but also things like restricting movements. So for the veterinary community, when coronavirus first came out, there was a lot of interest in the veterinary world because we do have quite a bit of expertise at dealing with infectious disease outbreaks. So we are contributing through testing. We're also working with the NHS and other aspects of the coronavirus effort. For example, looking at immunity to the coronaviruses that circulate in animal species as well. The bovine coronavirus has been in our cattle herds for a few years, does cause some mild disease, but is very closely related to a human coronavirus. So I think there's a lot that, sort of studying animal disease can contribute to society in general, directly or indirectly.
Tom, I want to come back to something that I believe you're involved in, which, from what I gather, could be a bit of a game changer in terms of what we do on the farm. I think you refer to it as pen-side diagnostics, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So I think the general concept is that if you're going to try and tackle disease, then you need to know which animals have the disease. So that's kind of pretty straightforward, and Mara's surveillance lab is integral to that understanding. So for farmers and vets, they can submit samples to a remote lab, get a result, and then act on that result. In some circumstances, it's actually of greater benefit for the farmer to know the result straight away. For example, if he's having to make decisions at that time as to whether to segregate animals, to put animals into different areas, to quarantine an animal, or to release it from quarantine. So there is a really big push to try and shorten the time from taking a sample to getting the result and then making the decision.
So what's this going to entail then? What are you working on in terms of bringing things closer and shortening that time frame?
Well, so I'll take a couple of examples. One is this would be quite related to our understanding of what we're doing for coronavirus. So if you think of how we test for coronavirus, one measure is looking for the actual virus itself, so the pathogen, the disease-causing organism. And so there are new methods in which you can quite quickly detect the fragments of the pathogen, the bug causing the disease. So there's certainly a few projects where they're not just trying to say yes, no, but they're actually trying to sort of understand which of the pathogens it is. So, for example, dairy farming, there are different bacteria that cause mastitis. So if you could discriminate between different types of bacteria, you can then sort of select your treatment on the animal straight away. And early treatment of mastitis is pretty critical to the outcome of that infection. And these can take, the form of, a bit like sort of, pregnancy test kits, where you actually take your sample and you put it onto the device and you get a sort of colour change. Yeah. So pretty straightforward. So these are the sort of broad technologies we're sort of looking into.
So that's where it's going then. Ultimately, I'm going to be able to have a pregnancy tester type thing, wand, whatever it is, and stick it in the ear of the sheep or something, and it tells me, gives me the result there and then.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so Al's probably more involved in the test. That's a good example of this, but it's a test for sheep scab. So if you actually have sheep coming on farm, you want to know quite quickly whether that animal has been exposed to sheep scab or potentially is infected.
Because, Al, that's the thing, isn't it? Sheep scab, sheep mites, they all kind of look the same to the farmer's eye. And yet, as Tom says, waiting for a diagnostic from a lab or a vet can just take too long.
You're absolutely right. I think particularly in terms of sheep scab, there are lots of other things that look a bit like sheep scab. Infestation with lice, for example, can make the sheep pretty itchy and, they scratch up against things. And actually the treatments for lice and for scab would be completely different. So it's really important, as Tom said, you've got to know what you're dealing with before you start treating it. Currently, that's a laboratory test, but one of our scientists is developing that test into test in the way that Tom described. This sort of pregnancy test type setup.
What's next on the horizon, Al? What's next on the horizon?
Well, there's a lot of really exciting science going around at the moment, particularly in the vaccines and the diagnostics field, partly driven by current circumstances. So there are a lot of new technologies and new techniques that have been developed for sort of rapid response to viruses, to various other diseases, that we are also developing as technologies that we can use in delivering vaccines for livestock. All of these things that are going around just now that are innovations are being built into our programme. So we're really excited in terms of producing new vaccines for some of the diseases that really vex farmers in the UK, and diagnostic tests as well. Really pushing forward with these new technologies. Tom mentioned earlier that we've developed this vaccine against Barber's Pole, and that really informs what we do in terms of some of the diseases that are important to UK farmers. So one of the projects that we're really busy pushing forward with is a new vaccine against some of the worms that infect sheep in the UK and cause really serious production losses in sheep in the UK. So thinking particularly here of the brown stomach worm.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I'm quite excited about things that are going to potentially save me from worming sheep and the problems that we have with potential antibiotic resistance, etc. Where are we with that? I'm excited. Where are we? Are we years from seeing this, or is it on the cusp? Are we?
Well, it's with all of these projects, the length of time to actually get something to market depends on market forces and investment in things. You look at. Harking back to COVID vaccines, that was a 10-year project. put into 10 months. And that's because of an enormous investment and a huge requirement for it. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a huge requirement for a vaccine against worms in sheep in the UK, but the actual investment into developing that kind of vaccine isn't nearly as large. Having said that, in terms of the science, we have developed a prototype vaccine that does impact on worms that infect sheep in the UK. So that's really exciting. That's the first vaccine of its type against worms in any ruminant. So we're really pleased about that. What we need to do now is to make sure that vaccine is actually fit for purpose. Does it work well in the field? Can we simplify it to make it cheap? Does it give you long-lasting protection, and sort of optimise all of these things to actually make it a commercial reality?
Tom, it is, it's probably almost like science fiction, or it would be like science fiction to the Moredun founders, this kind of talk, would it not?
Well, I think the founders are a pretty canny lot. I mean, if you think about the clostridial vaccines that we use today and really underpin the sheep farming industry, without which you have lots of dead lambs, they were all developed at Moredun. It's a similar sort of idea. Most of those original vaccines, they figured out what was causing the disease. So they figured out it was these clostridial bacterial diseases. They figured out what was causing the disease, so it's the toxins that are produced by these bacteria. And then if you inject these toxins into an animal, it generates an antibody response. And we're doing similar sort of things going forwards, but we have a much better way of trying to find the targets of the bug that we need to inject into the animal. Our tools are getting more refined in the fact that we can sequence the genome of the parasites, and we can figure out, through very, sort of refined techniques exactly what molecules the parasites are producing. But it's the same sort of concept that we're using in our founders. It's just we've got maybe slightly better tools to look at it in more depth.
Oh, would they be proud? The people that came together and founded Moredun, would they be proud of where you guys are now?
I'd really hope so. I think we're still doing what they set up the organisation to do in the first place.
100 years ago.
Yeah, 100 years ago. And, things have moved on. We've, diversified into other species. We've taken on new technologies and new scientific areas. But essentially, we're still doing exactly what they set us up to do, which is listen to farmers, find out what their issues are, and produce solutions to their problems.
I really need a feel. I think our listeners really need a feel for why this all matters. We're talking about big science. We're talking about lots and lots of effort. We're talking about zoonosis and One Health and making sure that that animals are healthy and humans are healthy. Why does it all really matter, Tom?
Well, we as a society and as a globe have huge challenges facing us. We have increase in climate change, or increasing temperature in our climates. We have increased numbers of people on this planet, and we have limited resource. So why does it matter about understanding infectious disease? Well, essentially, we need to secure our own food supply, and that's going to involve the agricultural industry. People are still going to be eating red meat and white meat, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. So we're going to have to manage feeding the world, the globe, with food that's sustainable to produce. So by that, I mean that it's going to be safe to eat, so it's not going to have bugs in it. It's going to have minimal impact on the climate, and the environment. We haven't really mentioned the environment, but we need to be aware that farming systems have to be not damaging to the environment. So basically, being able to support ecosystems like the pollinating insects, for example, that are really critical. We need to really kind of understand what diseases are present. How we can farm sustainably in the background of those diseases, and also we need to think quite carefully about the next diseases that are coming our way. One thing that coronavirus has told us is that there are always going to be diseases on the horizon. And one thing that is really striking, I think, in the effort to control coronavirus is that the vaccines that have become available are using really the latest vaccine technology, these mRNA vaccines. That's the cutting edge. That is the latest development in vaccinology. And what we've shown as a sort of a globe is that we can take this technology and actually deploy it quite rapidly if there's a need and a will. So why does it matter? I think it matters because we have to come up with new solutions for what is becoming an increasing number of issues that are affecting us on this globe.
Al, there might be someone out there listening who thinks, do you know what? The best answer to these problems, this disease and livestock, etc., is just not to eat livestock. Let's not eat meat at all. What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a growing body of people who feel that way. Having said that, there's a very large number of people who still see the value in rearing animals as a food. And if you look at somewhere like Scotland, where you've got 85% of the land surface is not suitable for raising anything other than sheep or upland cattle. So, there's no value in trying to produce arable crops on that kind of land. So if we are going to address the requirements in terms of world protein and in terms of domestic protein supply, we need to be using these areas. The one thing I would say is that if we are going to farm livestock for meat, which I think should be, we need to do it in the most sustainable and highest welfare manner that we possibly can.
I think that's what I'm about, and I hope that's what a lot of our listeners are about. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. All of this expertise, all in a lab at the bottom of the Pentland Hills, or labs at the bottom of the Pentland Hills. How do farmers get in touch, and can we get directly in touch with you if we've had a problem or an issue we want to look at? Mara?
Yes, you can. There is a website, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people know what web address is also on the newsletter that is sent out to the foundation members. You can call our receptions. We do our best to deal with your request as quickly as we can. If we cannot answer your question, we will try to find someone. The only thing I have to say is that in some cases we have to refer you back to your vet or discuss the problem with your vet, because we are not able to offer you a veterinary service because that's not our job.
It's super. And yeah, as I said earlier, I think my mind's blown with what you guys are trying to do. Thanks to you all for that. And we're in safe hands. I guess that's the way of putting it. I think we're in safe hands and going into the future of Scottish, UK, global livestock agriculture. Perfect. Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for taking part today. Well, that was fascinating stuff. A bit of a brain workout, I think, as well. So maybe not the best for listening when you're driving or whatever, but sit down, listen again maybe. And as Mara mentioned, the website, www.moredun.co.uk, it doesn't cost a lot to join and be a member of Moredun and support them in their work. And yeah, I hope it's come through in this episode, the value of Moredun and what they do for the livestock industry. If you can, join up, sign up, become a member and show them some support. I'm sure that would help to make sure that they're still there, still keeping going for the next 100 years. You can find out more about how to join up again on the Moredun website, www.moredun.co.uk.